We begin with the sacred gap. What is the sacred gap? Human beings uh, have a unique capacity. We have the ability to have distance in between our knower and what we're knowing. And I like to call this the sacred gap. It's this place of division, this place of separation, really, between uh, the knower and the known. And because of this, we're able to ask these fundamental questions. We can ask the questions, who am I? Who am I? Why am I here? And how will I live? Now, at the same time, this sacred gap is allowing us to ask these profound questions. It also introduces the experience of separation. And as we travel through this sacred gap, humanity seems to be writing uh, this grand myth. Myth as in sacred story, the myth of separation, where we travel together, we feel alone, we have our hearts broken, we find new possibilities, and all the while we're creating narratives, we're creating meaning around what it means to be human. As we're sort of fumbling through this sense of separation that emerges from this gap. Now, one of the things that can happen while we are writing this myth of separation is that we forget that it's a story. We forget that we are uh, like an actor is stepping into a role. Sometimes we forget that we are doing that in our lives. And when that happens, we fall under the spell of fracture. This is when we believe that we're broken. It's one thing to know that we are part of this grand story that includes that we feel broken. That's part of the deal here. It's another to forget that it's a story and that underneath that we're fundamentally whole. And when we forget that, it's the spell of fracture. We become lost in it. We think we're broken. We think we're messed up. We think maybe we're fundamentally bad or terrible or shattered to bits. And sometimes we feel that way. Sometimes we feel that way. We all know that as we travel through this labyrinth of living, as we move through this sacred gap as human beings, sometimes we have experiences that are too great for us to process. It's too big for us to be able to digest fully. And so, as a result of this, when we experience tragedy, when we experience something that is traumatic in our lives, our our being will create mechanisms to try to protect us. And one of the ways that we do this is through what's called repression. How do I set things aside in such a way that I can continue to survive or maybe even thrive? So we're moving through this sacred gap and we're writing this sacred myth of separation. But when something is too great for us to be able to be present with it, then our system needs a way to put it into hiding. And repression is a way to do that. And if we look further into how we do it, we can look at what's called the Parts Trinity. The Parts Trinity is looking at how there are aspects of ourself that function as defense mechanisms, nuanced ways that certain parts of us will protect other parts of us as a way to hide our pain, assuming that in the moment, feeling that pain would short circuit our system. What I'm going to do is introduce these three types of parts. Two of the parts are protective parts. We'll call them shadow guardians. And then we'll look at the third part, which is what they are actually hiding. So we have yin guardians, and they are going to protect us in a very certain way. And then we have yang guardians, and they're going to protect us in a different kind of way. If any of you are familiar with IFS, internal family systems, they would call this the firefighters and the managers. The firefighters are the yin guardians and the managers are the yang guardians. I don't use that language because I'm trying to use a category that's more fundamental and less archetypal, because there are many kinds of yin guardians and many kinds of yang guardians. Now, what they are guarding is an entire hidden world that includes a part or parts of the self that experience the initial ouch. So let's say you're a young kid and you're in the living room and you're playing, and then all of a sudden you hear your parents fighting. And maybe it gets violent, or at least it gets very loud. And so you feel very vulnerable, you feel overwhelmed. And so your system will begin to put that into hiding, not just the part of you that feels overwhelmed, but the entire world that you're internalizing. The feelings, the beliefs, even aspects of you that look like your mother and father or your parents, all of that gets put into hiding. This is a way that our system in its wisdom will protect us by putting something into latency so that later those deep treasures can be unearthed and cultivated. It's like these deep seeds of potential that on the surface, they seem like hell, like agony, torment. But if we learn how to be with them in such a way, something else happens. They transform.